Basically what we're going to talk about is Printing 101. It's a pretty hot topic because a lot of you deal with, just not in your business world, but you also deal in the aspect of sometime you're a volunteer or you're working in the community and you want to get something printed. And basically I'm going to review some of the terminology and some of the stuff you'll run across, and it will help you better when you put a project together. Basically what it is we're going to talk about the terminology you hear a lot is CMYK. CMYK is the inks that they use to make four-color process. And if you remember when you were in elementary school, you used to get inks or paint, and you used to mix it together, and you did what when you wanted to make orange? You took red and yellow, and you mixed them together, and you got a color. That's how the printing industry works, is that if you see right there, those colors, CMYK, cyan, magenta, yellow, and black, are the only three inks that they use to make four-color process, because ink is transparent. And by the way, I have West here, so I have an expert in the printing industry. I'm sure I'll get mentioned if I miss something. Ink is transparent, so when you see it, and it's through reflective light coming down onto the paper or the object up to your eyes, by mixing those colors together, that's how you are able to get your process in it. And I always throw up there, why is it CMYK and not CMYB for black? Well, they put K so nobody confuses it with blue. This is the other concept that we have is called, after CMYK, you have CMYK versus RGB. RGB is what your computer screens are based off of. That is a red, blue, green. And on the example you see up here, you will see the difference of how the processes work. Now, your colors on a computer screen is not going to give you the same colors that you have on a printed material. They're going to be brighter because you're using intermittent light that is coming from behind versus light that's coming out of the surface reflecting up. A lot of times people say, well, oh yeah, that looks great. Go ahead and print it, and then when they get it, it doesn't look like what they had on the screen. It's a totally different process of how your eyes are tricked. Your television is, all those colors, facial tones, are three-color of RGB process. So that's the difference between the two when you have a computer that you're looking at, such as a tablet, and your printed piece. Spot color. Now, this is another color that can be used in the sense of it can be combined with anything. Think of your paint chips at a paint store. That is a set color. So you could do four-color process, but let's say you were branding a certain color that you have branded. You have a red, or I'll use Chevrolet gold for their bow tie, or GMC red, or an automotive has a set color that they picked. You can do a four-color process and then be able to brand your color with a spot color. Then the terminology comes to four-color plus one. So that you have that. And those colors are all picked. It's a system called the Pantone system. And what it is they created for the industry all over. If you say, I want PMS 31, which is a red, you will get that exact color on your printed piece. It's just like an ink color. Now we're going to talk about low-res and high-res files, and this is really where the printers and anybody that does it dealing with the businesses have. If you notice on the screen, there's a high-res and a low-res resolution. And that's what we're going to talk about, that's dots per inch. And the television screens work the same way. Why you can have a screen at Comerica that you see everything, their dots per inch are different. Websites, and we get it all the time in the industry, just pick up my graphics from the website. Websites are, again, low-res files, and they don't reproduce printing wise. If you see up in the screen right here, we have a high resolution file. We have the water flower on the side, that's a 300 dpi. That's dots per inch. Versus a low res is only 72. So you see when you have a file, for somebody to be able to produce it and print it, you'll hear terminology as we need a high resolution file so you're able to reproduce it. Down at the bottom, if you see what I put up there, is you see a star representing different dots per inch. 1 dot per inch, you don't have a star. All the way up to 300 dots per inch, you'll be able to get the reproduction you want. So there's a good example. We also, and I don't know if the screen shows it well enough, but here is a TIFF file. That's a file that you would use for printing. It's specially designed file where you see, you see the two resolutions right here are totally different, and then blurry is the JPEG. Most JPEG files are what are used on the internet. Images. When we talk about images, there are files that printers ask for. And we're going to discuss that. They will want, sometimes a lot of stuff comes in a PDF or a JPEG. And when you deal with printers or they want a high-res file for printing. You also have TIFF files, which are recommended. And you can see the difference in the letters alone if you have a high-res or a low-res font. And then a JPEG, which you can see is blurry. And the terminology of what they stand for, fancy names in there, but those are what the files that are good. When we deal with images, printers or anybody that does a shop wants to have a TIFF file or an EPS file. They are the best files to have. You're going to get high quality graphics and printing. Unfortunately, we don't have them. What files that are not recommended are JPEGs, GIF files, PDF files can be used, and then Microsoft, Excel, PowerPoint, documents and all that are not what printers can use. They look, now we're going to go back, here's your test. They look great on your screen because you're using RGB where you use a different process when you print. So that's why these are not recommended. And normally if you give somebody a PowerPoint or that, it has to be changed to a TIFF or an EPS file. Let's talk about color paper. Color paper is great. The problem with color paper is most people, you should use white. The problem is, oh, I want a real nice blue paper and I want to print it on black ink. Now you're getting into how the eyes are tricked. When you think about it, now you're putting black on blue, and it's going to change that transparent ink underneath of it and give you a color. So you might like what it looks like on your screen, and you want to go to a color paper. Color papers are good, but be aware of what ink you put on it. Instead of going to a colored paper, what you could do is do a tint of a pink paper, which is an ink. Let's say that we want to use a pink color. Well, what would you do to make it a light pink? You would change the dots per inch on it to make it lighter, and then put a black ink on top of it. So you could eliminate a colored stock, and colored stocks are more expensive, and go to a white stock and make it a two-color process, in a sense a spot color, which is screen, and then a black ink on it. So that's a recommended on color paper. Paper stocks, we all hear it. What kind of, I get it all the time. Well, I just put it on anything. Well, there's a lot of papers out there. Let's talk about, you hear bond stock, and a lot of times you'll relate to bond stock is kind of what your copy paper is. That's a bond stock. And the way that paper was devised and why they give you weights, sometimes says, is it an 80 pound, is it 100 pound, is it 10 point? Is somebody the same guy that said all paper's 8.5 by 11. There's just why. We still haven't figured out. I think in Europe it's 8 by 10 is their standard cut sheet. They took a 17 and a half by 22, stacked 500 sheets, and that's how they weighed it, and that's how they came up with the system of how they do the weight of the paper. Bond stock, you got a 20-pound bond copy paper, 24-pound is usually a little up. Then you have book stock. Book stock is maybe a better paper, but you see it in magazines, you see book stock in newspapers. Text stock is a little bit higher weight. It's a little bit thicker. It usually has different types of glosses on it. When they run paper through a press, they can literally actually buff the paper, and that's what gives it shines on it. You have cover stock, which is a little bit heavier. A lot of times you'll have a magazine that has a little bit of heavier stock. Sometimes they'll put a text stock on top that's heavier, and then inside put a bond stock. There's all different ways to do it. But basically, the heavier the stock is, the more expensive it is because of trucking and moving it around. So you look at it, the aspect of what stocks you have. Most print houses, they'll ask for samples of stocks, and they'll show them to you so you'll be able to do it. Most people take stock and they rub it like this in their hand, and that's how they talk about, well, that feels good. That's the stock I want. But they do that by thickness. Now let's talk about the printing process. A lot of you, there have been a lot of changes in my lifetime on that, but let's talk about the good old days where it was called a letterpress. Letterpress was the old days where they had raised type. Think of your rubber stamp that you used to have in the old days that had a raised. Letter was the very first way it did, and all it was a plate somehow pressed onto a piece of paper, sometime by a cylinder, or in the old days it was just you've seen the old newspapers that they laid out type on it, and then they pressed it on that. That's the way the printing industry began. That's a letterpress. You don't see very much of this unless it's high-end printing and they want to go back to a retro type look. Offset printing. Offset printing is pretty much what the majority of it, the technology is nowadays versus digital. And what is offset printing is that they use they use a system of ink, oil, and water doesn't mix, and ink is an oil. So the process, the way it works is, the reason it's called offset is they have a printing plate, an image that the plate was made, and that is made in a negative format. As it rolls onto the blanket right here, it transfers the ink, and ink sticks to the area where the image is. And if you looked at this image real here, it would have all the little dots for our dots per square inch, and it would go there and transfer onto the blanket. And then if you notice that the offset cylinder, or where the paper runs through, then it transfers back onto the paper. That's where you get the offset. So you go positive to negative to positive. And that's how the printing process, majority of industry works right now, is offset printing. And it's a technology that's been around a long time, and it's a good technology because you can do larger runs that way. Let's talk about digital printing. Digital printing has really made strides, and it's pretty much, when you talk about, it's like photocopying. Nowadays they have digital printing where you have toner application, dry toner or wet toner, and you'll be able to print digitally. The advantage of digital printing, they've eliminated the plate process. In the old days, you had to create a plate and burn negatives first, and take the negatives, put it over a plate, burn the plate, and there was a lot of steps. Now, because of the digital age, process plates are made right out from an image. They don't do negatives very much anymore. They actually print a plate. Well, in digital printing, everything is done right on the piece of equipment. Let's talk about photocopy versus printing. They're both great tools, and they are great avenues to use when you're making a decision of a print process. Say you need 1,500 black and white copies or 500 copies of a full sales sheet. Digital printing or photocopying at a print shop is a great tool to go. The prices are usually set at one firm price, or you get a firm price off a discount, and it's a real good way to get it done. Also, a quick turnaround. You can get digital printing, and you usually can get it in 24 hours or the same day in small quantities. Where it changes is when you do photocopying versus printing. Photocopying includes digital printing. You got time, fast turnaround, money typical, it's a fixed price as I talked about, and your quantity on photocopiers really came a long way. So you can get some pretty good quality on photocopying. But your paper choices are a little bit down. You've got to stay with a bond, or you might have to buy a gloss, or you might have to bring your own paper in. So you're limited on your stocks, but again, quick turnaround for your project. Let's talk about printing versus photocopying. Printing usually takes longer. Once your proof's approved, you have probably usually turn around 5 to 7 days, sometimes 10 working days. But what you get is now you're using that CMYK process. You'll be able to increase your stocks, maybe go to a gloss, go to a matte finish, and be able to increase the quality of it and maybe be able to get a better. You've all seen when you look at a flyer in the bags, a toner applications versus a printed application. You can tell. So you might want that image down the line. We have screen printing out there. Screen printing is what t-shirts are made, and it's a very simple process where they lay down ink onto a screen and they drag it across, and then if they want another color, they then load ink on another screen and they drag it across. And if you see this piece of equipment on the side, that's high-end, how to do t-shirts, banners down the line. So there's a process called screen printing. There's also engraved printing, thermal graphic printing. Anybody ever seen a business card that has raised letter on it? They use an ink and they put a powder in it, and then when they heat that powder, expands the ink and you get that thermographic. Flexographic printing is used in the label industry. It's actually a rubber plate, almost like letterpress that prints onto substocks. What do printers need to know? A lot of times we get to know, please, what is it going to cost for 500 flyers? Well, we have all these variables we just talked about. What's the name of the project so they're on the same page you are? What is the size of it? 8.5 by 11, 11 by 17. How many colors? Is it going to be 2 spot colors, black and orange, or is it going to be process color? How many pieces do you want? What type of paper do you want? The material or the supply to printer. Are you going to give them camera-ready copy, or do they have to design it? When do you need the project delivered? That's so important. Your printers, any printer will have recommendations. They might have specials on stocks down the line to help you out. But to ensure that your quote compares to other quotes, prepare yourself. Or ask the printer that you deal with, what do you need from me to put it together? I want to thank you very much for the short time. I'm on time too, 30 seconds. If you want a copy of this presentation, don't hesitate to email me that or like me on Facebook at Bear Graphics of Michigan. Thank you very much for your time, and everybody have a great holiday.